The first thing people assume when they hear the word courtroom is order, wood polished by decades of solemn promises, voices measured and calm, justice moving forward one careful step at a time. What they don't imagine is fear. Not the kind that creeps in quietly, but the kind that grips your chest so hard you forget how to breathe. I learned that lesson the morning my disabled daughter was attacked in open court by a woman who believed rules were weapons and power was hers to wield. She had no idea that the woman seated behind the bench, calm, unreadable, watching everything, was my wife. My daughter, Lily, was 12 years old and walked with a prosthetic leg that she called her robot foot. She tried to joke about it because humor made other people less uncomfortable, but I knew the truth. Every step cost her something. Every stare took a piece of her confidence. Still, she was brave in ways most adults never learn to be. That morning, she wore her favorite blue sweater, the one she said made her feel normal, and clutched my hand as if the courtroom itself might swallow her whole. We weren't there for drama. We were there because our HOA had decided that Lily's wheelchair ramp, professionally installed, city-approved, medically necessary, was a violation of community aesthetics. The letter they sent was cold and precise, as if it were talking about a cracked fence instead of a child's ability to enter her own home. When we appealed, when we begged for basic humanity, they escalated. Fines, threats, legal action. And at the center of it all was Karen, the HOA board president, a woman who wore entitlement like perfume and smiled only when she was winning. Karen believed the courtroom would be her stage. I could tell from the way she walked in, head high, heels sharp against the floor, eyes scanning for submission. She glanced at Lily and frowned, not with concern but irritation, as if my daughter's very existence complicated her narrative. Lily noticed. She always noticed. Her grip tightened on my hand, and I felt a familiar surge of anger rise in my chest, the kind that comes when you realize the world will never stop testing your child. My wife, Sarah, was already on the bench when we entered. Her robe fell neatly over her shoulders, her expression neutral, professional, almost distant. To anyone else, she was simply the judge assigned to a minor civil case. To me, she was the woman who had stayed up nights researching prosthetics, who had practiced walking beside Lily for hours, who had taught her that dignity was not something anyone could take without permission. But in that room, she was the law, and I knew better than to look at her for comfort. We had agreed, no acknowledgement, no special treatment, no deviation from fairness. Justice, if it came, would have to earn its way. The hearing began the way these things always do. Procedural language, motions, a recitation of HOA bylaws that sounded impressive until you realized they were being used to justify cruelty. Karen spoke first. She didn't say Lily's name. She referred to her as the child or the resident's dependent, reducing my daughter to a line item in a dispute. She argued that accommodations set a dangerous precedent, that allowing one exception would open the floodgates. Her voice was smooth, rehearsed, confident. She was used to people backing down when she spoke like that. Then she did something I will never forget. As Lily shifted in her chair, her prosthetic making a soft mechanical click against the floor, Karen rolled her eyes. Loudly, deliberately, she turned toward the bench and said, "Your Honor, while I sympathize with situations like this, personal circumstances cannot be allowed to override community standards. Situations like this." I felt Lily flinch. Not physically. She was too proud for that, but something in her posture collapsed inward, as if she were trying to make herself smaller. My heart broke in that instant, but before I could react, Karen kept going. She stepped closer to us, ignoring the invisible boundary of respect that should exist in any courtroom, and gestured toward Lily's leg. "That thing," she said, her voice sharp with disdain, "doesn't give them the right to modify shared property." The room went quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like the air itself had frozen. I opened my mouth to object, my pulse roaring in my ears, but Lily spoke first. "It's not a thing," she said softly. "It's my leg." Her voice didn't shake, but mine did when I finally stood. I demanded the court intervene, demanded basic decorum, demanded that my child be treated like a human being. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Karen scoffed. a sound full of practiced superiority, and waved her hand dismissively. "This is exactly the problem," she said. "They're emotional. They're exploiting sympathy." And then, in a move so shocking it didn't register at first, she reached out. Her hand brushed Lily's shoulder. Not gently, not accidentally. It was a shove, small but unmistakable, enough to throw Lily off balance. The chair scraped loudly against the floor as Lily stumbled, her prosthetic catching awkwardly. She cried out, more in surprise than pain, and in that sound was every fear I had ever had as a parent. Time fractured. I don't remember standing, but suddenly I was between them, my body moving on instinct, my voice echoing through the courtroom as I shouted for security. The bailiff rushed forward. Gasps rippled through the spectators. Karen stepped back, hands raised, already shifting into victim mode, her mouth forming protests that sounded hollow even to her own ears. But what I remember most is the look on the judge's face. Sarah had not moved. She had not raised her voice. But something had changed. The calm neutrality was gone, replaced by an intensity so focused it felt like a physical force. Her eyes locked onto Karen, and for the first time since walking into that room, Karen hesitated. She didn't know why, not yet, but she felt it. The power dynamic she relied on had just shattered. "Bailiff," my wife said, her voice steady and cold. "Ensure the child is seated and unharmed." Then she turned fully toward Karen. "Ms. Thompson," she continued, "did you just make physical contact with a minor in my courtroom?" Karen laughed nervously, a brittle sound. "Your Honor, you're misunderstanding. I was simply—" "Answer the question," Sarah said. The authority in her tone silenced every excuse Karen had prepared. For the first time, she looked unsure. "Yes," Karen muttered. "But it wasn't." "That will be sufficient," Sarah replied. Lily was sitting again now, the bailiff kneeling beside her, asking softly if she was hurt. She nodded, tears streaking her cheeks, more from humiliation than injury. I held her hand, furious and helpless all at once. Around us, the room buzzed with whispered disbelief. No one had expected this case to turn into something so raw, so undeniable. Sarah leaned forward slightly, her gaze never leaving Karen. "This court does not tolerate intimidation, discrimination, or physical aggression," she said. "Especially against a child. Especially against a child with a disability." Karen swallowed hard. She glanced around the room, searching for support, for the familiar faces that usually nodded along to her authority. She found none. Still, she didn't know the full truth. She didn't know that the woman who now controlled her fate had watched Lily take her first painful steps on a prosthetic. She didn't know that every word she had spoken about that thing had landed like a blow to a mother's heart. She thought this was still just a bad moment, a misunderstanding she could spin her way out of. She was wrong. And as the courtroom settled into a charged silence, as my wife prepared to speak again, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about an HOA dispute anymore. This was about dignity, about drawing a line so clear that no one could ever pretend they didn't see it. Justice hadn't arrived with a gavel slam or a dramatic speech. It had arrived the moment Karen crossed a boundary she could never uncross, and the wrong judge was watching. The silence that followed felt heavier than any shout ever could. Karen stood frozen in the center of the courtroom, her confidence leaking away in small, visible cracks. She tried to straighten her posture, tried to reclaim the composure she'd walked in with, but it was gone. You can only pretend to be powerful for so long before the truth catches up with you, and the truth was standing behind the bench wearing a judge's robe. Sarah didn't rush. She understood something Karen never had. Real authority doesn't need theatrics. It waits. It lets the weight of consequence settle in before it moves. "This hearing is recessed for 5 minutes, Sarah said calmly. "Ms. Thompson, you will remain here. Counsel, do not leave the courtroom." The gavel came down once, not loud, not dramatic, final. The bailiff guided Lily and me to a bench near the wall. My daughter's hands trembled now that the adrenaline had worn off. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, feeling the fragile strength of her body against mine, and whispered that she had done nothing wrong. She nodded, but I could see the question in her eyes. The same question disabled children learn to ask far too early. Why does my existence make people angry? Karen paced a few steps away, whispering urgently to her attorney. Her voice carried just enough for me to hear fragments. It was nothing. She overreacted. People are too sensitive these days. The excuses were familiar. They always were. Cruelty dressed up as logic, accountability dismissed as inconvenience. When the judge returned, she did something unexpected. She asked Karen to take the stand. Karen's attorney objected immediately, citing procedure, relevance, anything he could reach for. Sarah listened, nodded once, then overruled him with quiet precision. Her reasoning was airtight, her command of the law effortless. Anyone watching closely could see this wasn't emotion driving her. It was control. Karen approached the stand with stiff movements, one hand clutching the railing as if it might steady her. She raised her right hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. From where I stood, I could see the faint sheen of sweat on her forehead. "Ms. Thompson," Sarah began, "how long have you been president of the HOA?" "7 years," Karen replied, her voice regaining a hint of arrogance. Experience was her comfort zone. Power structures, titles. "And in those 7 years," Sarah continued, "how many accommodation requests related to disability has the HOA approved?" Karen hesitated. I don't have that number memorized." "Then estimate," Sarah said. Karen's lips pressed together. "Very few." "How many is very few?" "1," she said finally. "Maybe 2." Sarah nodded slowly. "And how many were denied?" Karen shifted in her seat. "Those decisions were based on bylaws, not personal bias." "That was not my question," Sarah replied. "How many?" Karen glanced at her attorney, then back at the bench. "Several." "Several meaning 10? 20? 50? "I don't know," Karen snapped. The impatience crept back into her tone. "But that's irrelevant." "Ms. Thompson," Sarah said sharply, cutting her off. "Nothing is irrelevant when a child is harmed in this courtroom." The words landed hard. Karen's face flushed, anger and fear warring openly now. Sarah continued, her voice measured but relentless. "You testified that allowing accommodations sets a dangerous precedent. Can you explain to this court how a wheelchair ramp endangers anyone?" Karen scoffed. "It's not about danger in that sense. It's about uniformity, property values. If everyone starts changing things—" "Everyone?" Sarah asked. "Or people with documented medical needs?" Karen faltered. "That's not what I meant." "But that is what you said," Sarah replied. "And earlier today you referred to a child's prosthetic leg as that thing. Do you deny saying that?" Karen's mouth opened, then closed. The courtroom leaned in as one. "No," she said quietly. "I said it." "And do you believe," Sarah asked, "that language like that shows respect for individuals with disabilities?" Karen bristled. "I'm not required to coddle people. I enforce rules." There it was, the truth slipping out unguarded. Sarah leaned back slightly, folding her hands. "Rules," she repeated. "Let's talk about rules. Are you aware that federal and state laws require reasonable accommodations for individuals with disabilities?" "Yes," Karen said, defensive. "But HOAs have autonomy." "Autonomy does not override the law," Sarah said. "And it certainly does not excuse physical aggression. Tell this court, Ms. Thompson, why you felt it was appropriate to place your hands on a child." Karen's voice rose. "I didn't hurt her. She exaggerated." Before she could finish, Lily spoke again. "I almost fell," she said softly. Every head turned toward her. "I wasn't trying to cause trouble," Lily continued. "I just want to go into my house like everyone else." Her words weren't dramatic. They weren't rehearsed. They were simple, honest, devastating. Karen looked away. Sarah allowed the moment to breathe before speaking again. "Ms. Thompson," she said, "this court finds that your actions today constitute both contempt and assault." Gasps rippled through the room. Karen shot to her feet. You can't. This is outrageous. You're biased. Sit down, Sarah commanded, her voice slicing through the chaos. Karen froze. Slowly, she lowered herself back into the chair. You will be fined for contempt, Sarah continued. The matter of assault will be referred to the appropriate authorities. Additionally, this court will be issuing an injunction against the HOA, requiring immediate approval of the requested accommodations, along with a review of all prior disability-related denials. Karen's face drained of color. You're destroying everything I built? She whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Sarah's expression softened, not with pity, but with something more powerful. Resolve. No, she said. You destroyed it the moment you forgot that rules exist to serve people, not harm them. Only then did Sarah do something that changed everything. She looked at me, not as a judge, as a wife, just for a heartbeat, long enough for the truth to land. Karen followed her gaze. Her eyes moved from the bench to me, then to Lily and back again. Confusion twisted into realization. No, Karen breathed. No. Sarah addressed the courtroom one final time. For the record, she said, the child involved in this case is my daughter. The room erupted. Karen staggered back as if struck, her mouth opening in silent horror. You let this happen, she stammered. You let me. I let the law happen, Sarah replied. Exactly as it should. Lily squeezed my hand, her tears finally spilling over. Not from fear this time, but from relief. For the first time since this nightmare began, someone in power had not only seen her, but chosen her. Karen collapsed into her chair, her authority reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale. The hearing was adjourned, but its impact would ripple far beyond that room. As we walked out, Lily looked up at her mother, awe in her eyes. Mom, she whispered. You were really brave. Sarah knelt in front of her, pressing her forehead gently to Lily's. So were you. Justice hadn't just spoken that day. It had listened. We thought the worst was over when we stepped out of the courtroom, but justice has a way of unfolding in layers. The hallway outside buzzed with low voices, attorneys murmuring into phones, spectators replaying what they just witnessed in hushed disbelief. Lily walked between Sarah and me, her steps uneven but determined, her chin lifted in a way that told me something inside her had shifted. Not healed, not yet, but strengthened. Karen didn't follow us out right away. When she did, it was flanked by her attorney and a court officer, her posture rigid, her face pale and tight. The woman who had once ruled our neighborhood with threats and fines now looked small, almost fragile. But I didn't feel sympathy. Power used without empathy leaves scars, and my daughter carried enough of those already. Word spread fast, faster than I expected. By the time we reached the parking lot, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Neighbors, parents from Lily's school, even people we barely knew from the community. They'd heard. Someone had recorded part of the hearing before phones were confiscated. Another person had posted about it online. The story was already escaping the courtroom, growing legs, demanding attention. That night, Lily couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, her prosthetic resting beside her, tracing invisible shapes on the wood with her finger. I joined her quietly, pouring 2 glasses of milk like I used to when she was younger. Dad? She said without looking up. Do you think she hates me? The question hit harder than any shove ever could. No, I said carefully. I think she hates being reminded that other people exist. Lily considered that. She looked scared at the end. Yes, I said, because bullies are always scared of losing control. Sarah joined us then, still in her robe, exhaustion finally showing in her eyes. She sat beside Lily and took her hand. You didn't do anything to deserve what happened, she said gently. Not today. Not ever. I know, Lily replied, and this time I believed her. The next morning, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. For the first time since we'd moved into the neighborhood, they asked residents to attend. The tone of the email was frantic, filled with legal language and vague reassurances about compliance, and community values. Karen's name was noticeably absent. The meeting was held in the clubhouse, a place that had once felt unwelcoming, its walls decorated with strict notices and lists of prohibited behaviors. That night it felt different, crowded, uneasy. I stood up when they opened the floor for comments. My hands shook, not with fear, but with the weight of being heard. "My daughter was assaulted in court by your president," I said, my voice steady. "Not because she broke a rule, but because she exists in a body that makes some people uncomfortable." A murmur rippled through the room. "This HOA has fined us for a ramp that lets her enter her own home," I continued. "You called it an eyesore. I call it access. You called it a violation. I call it dignity." No one interrupted me. No one dared. A board member cleared his throat. "We are reviewing our policies," he said weakly. "Good," I replied, "because the law is already reviewing you." Lily stood up beside me then, unprompted. "I don't want special treatment," she said. "I just want the same chance everyone else gets." There was silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was reflective. Within a week, Karen resigned. Quietly, no farewell email, no explanation, just gone. The HOA hired a compliance consultant. All pending fines related to disability accommodations were dropped. New guidelines were issued, clear, explicit, humane. But the real change wasn't on paper. It was in the way neighbors looked at Lily now. Not with pity, not with avoidance, but with respect. Kids who had never spoken to her before started saying hello. Parents asked questions, not intrusive ones, but honest ones. Curiosity without cruelty. One afternoon, Lily came home smiling. "They asked me to join student council," she said casually. I froze. "They did." She nodded. "They said I speak well under pressure." Sarah laughed softly, pride shining in her eyes. The legal consequences continued to unfold. Karen was charged with misdemeanor assault. Her attorney tried to argue intent, stress, misunderstanding. None of it stuck. The footage, the testimony, Lily's calm, devastating words. They told the real story. At the hearing, Karen avoided looking at us. When the judge, another one, not Sarah, read the sentence, Karen finally cried. Not the tears of remorse, but the tears of someone realizing the world would no longer bend around her. Afterward, Lily surprised us. "I don't want to watch," she said. "I already know what justice looks like." Justice, for her, wasn't punishment. It was permission to exist without apology. That evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind our houses, Lily rested her head on my shoulder. "Dad," she said, "do you think things will be different now?" I thought about the ramp being rebuilt stronger, about the bylaws rewritten, about a courtroom that had listened. "Yes," I said, "because you made them different." She smiled, small but certain. And in that moment, I realized something important. The real victory wasn't that Karen lost. It was that Lily no longer saw herself as the problem that needed fixing. The world had been forced to adjust instead. The weeks that followed were quieter, but not calm. Change rarely announces itself with noise. It settles in slowly, reshaping routines, exposing truths people would rather ignore. For Lily, the world felt subtly different, like a room where the furniture had been rearranged overnight. Familiar, but no longer hostile in the same way. The new ramp was installed on a Tuesday morning. Not because we begged, not because we threatened, but because the HOA, now under legal supervision, had finally been forced to acknowledge something basic. That accessibility is not charity, it's compliance, and more importantly, it's humanity. The workers asked Lily where she wanted the railing height. One of them knelt to her level and explained each step before touching anything. Lily noticed. She always noticed. When it was finished, she rolled her wheelchair up and down the ramp twice, just to feel it. Then she stood, clipped her prosthetic into place, and walked up on her own. No applause, no speeches, just a quiet victory that belonged entirely to her. But not everyone was comfortable with that victory. There were whispers, anonymous posts online questioning judicial ethics, Comments suggesting Sarah had manipulated the system, that Lily was being used to make a point. People who had never met us, never seen the nights Sarah spent massaging Lily's aching muscles, never watched me carry her up the stairs when her leg failed her. Those people suddenly felt entitled to opinions. Sarah read them without reacting. Outwardly, that night, after Lily went to bed, she sat at the edge of our room, her shoulders heavy. "They don't understand," she said quietly. "I know," I replied. "They think justice is supposed to be distant, cold, that caring makes you weak." I took her hand. "Caring is why you're good at what you do." The scrutiny intensified. A formal ethics review was announced, not because Sarah had done anything wrong, but because power hates being exposed. The irony was painful. Karen had physically assaulted a disabled child, yet it was the judge who was questioned for integrity. Sarah cooperated fully. She handed over records, timelines, disclosures. She had followed every rule, every safeguard. The review concluded exactly as expected. No misconduct, no bias, no violation. But the process left a mark. Lily overheard more than we realized. One afternoon, she asked, "Mom, did I cause trouble for you?" Sarah froze. "No," she said firmly, kneeling in front of her. "You didn't cause trouble. You revealed it." Lily frowned. "But people are mad. Some people get angry when the mirror shows them who they really are," Sarah replied. "That's not your burden to carry." At school, Lily gave a presentation for student council. The topic was accessibility, not as a slogan but as lived experience. She talked about doors too heavy to open, bathrooms too narrow to enter, rules written by people who never imagined bodies like hers. She didn't ask for sympathy. She asked for awareness. The room listened. A week later, the principal announced a new accessibility review for the entire campus. Ramps were widened, automatic doors installed, emergency plans updated to include students with mobility needs. Change begets change. Meanwhile, Karen faded from relevance. Her name stopped coming up in meetings. Her social media went quiet. The woman who had once thrived on control now lived in the margins of her own community. Consequences didn't roar, they isolated. One evening, Lily found an old HOA violation notice in a drawer. She held it up, studying the cold language, the threat of fines, the implication that she was a problem to be managed. "Can we throw this away?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She tore it in half. Then again. Small, deliberate motions. When she was done, she dropped the pieces into the trash and exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath for years. Later that night, she said something that stayed with me. "I don't think I'm invisible anymore." She wasn't wrong. People began asking Lily for input, real input, not performative gestures. City planners invited her to a youth advisory panel. A local paper asked for an interview. She declined the spotlight but agreed to write a short piece, on her terms. She titled it simply, "Access is not a favor." Sarah watched her type, eyes shining, and I realized this was the part no court ruling could deliver. This was agency, voice, ownership of her own narrative. The storm had passed, but it had cleared the air. And in the quiet that followed, something powerful took root. Not just for Lily, but for everyone who had been watching, waiting for permission to stand up and say, "This isn't right." They had it now. Time has a way of revealing what moments cannot. Months passed, and the story that once felt like a raw, open wound began to settle into something else. Not forgotten, not softened, but understood. What happened in that courtroom stopped being a single incident and became a reference point. A before and an after. Lily grew taller that year. Not just physically, though she needed new pants twice, but in the way she occupied space. She no longer apologized when she asked for help. She no longer shrank when people stared. When someone spoke over her, she interrupted. Politely, firmly, without fear. One afternoon as we were walking, slowly, carefully, through the neighborhood, a woman we barely knew approached us. She hesitated, clearly nervous. "My son uses a walker," she said quietly. We were scared to ask the HOA for anything. After what you did. We're not anymore. Lily smiled at her. You should ask, she said. You deserve to live here too. That was the moment I realized the ripple hadn't stopped at us. It had moved outward, touching people we would never fully meet, changing decisions we would never see. Justice rarely announces its full reach, but its fingerprints show up everywhere. Sarah returned to the bench with the same discipline she always had, but something in her deepened. She became known for something judges are rarely credited for: clarity with compassion. Lawyers adjusted their tone in her courtroom. Disrespect was shut down instantly, not with anger but with certainty. One day, a young clerk asked her, "How do you stay impartial when cases are so emotional?" Sarah answered without hesitation, "Impartial doesn't mean indifferent. It means fair, with your eyes open." Karen's case officially closed with a conviction, probation, and mandatory counseling. There was no dramatic redemption arc, no apology that reached us, and that was fine. Not every story needs reconciliation to be complete. Accountability was enough. Lily never asked to see Karen again. She didn't need to. The power had shifted, and she felt it. On the anniversary of the hearing, Lily asked to visit the courthouse. Not the courtroom, just the building. She stood in the lobby, looking up at the seal on the wall. "This place used to scare me," she said. "And now?" I asked. "It still does," she replied honestly. "But not because of me." She paused, then added, "Because of what people can do if no one stops them." That awareness didn't make her bitter. It made her brave. That night, she wrote in her journal. Later, she let me read one sentence. "I learned that dignity doesn't ask permission, and justice works best when it listens." For years, the HOA had tried to teach her a different lesson. That power belongs to the loudest voice, that rules matter more than people, that silence is safer than resistance. The courtroom corrected that lie in one irreversible moment. And here is the truth that stays with me, the one I wish every viewer could carry with them. The most dangerous people are not the angry ones. They are the comfortable ones who believe the system will protect them no matter what they do. Karen believed that, right up until she didn't. Lily now wants to study law someday. Not to be a judge like her mother, but to be an advocate. Judges decide, she told us. Advocates make sure people get heard first. When I watch her walk up that ramp, steady, confident, unafraid, I understand what that day was really about. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't humiliation. It wasn't even punishment. It was a line being drawn. A child saying, "I belong here." A mother saying, "The law sees you." And a system, for once, answering back. Some stories end with justice served. Ours ended with something better. Justice learned to listen, and a little girl learned she never had to be small again.